Welcome to the Deep Dive. We've received a fascinating stack of sources designed to help us understand a really critical international topic: how major global powers, specifically Russia and China, navigate their incredibly complex relationships with Iran.
And this isn't just a discussion about foreign policy. It's really a masterclass in strategic calculation. Our mission today is to unpack that delicate balancing act, the cautious calculus, as you put it, explaining not just what these countries do, but why they prioritize restraint.
And also how analysts use this very careful, neutral language to describe it all.
Exactly. The language itself is part of the story.
Okay, so let's start by framing the challenge. Our sources define an international crisis here not as a single event, but as this compounding situation.
Right. A situation where a country faces serious, sustained challenges. We're talking economic pressure, diplomatic tension, security concerns. It's never just one thing.
And this combination really affects how other global powers can't, or maybe more importantly, cannot interact with them.
And those global powers, Russia and China, their influence extends so far beyond their own borders. It's derived from, massive economic strength, political leadership.
And their permanent seats in international decision-making bodies.
Absolutely. Their actions are consequential, and because of that, they're always constrained by the very global systems they help to lead.
Which brings us to Iran's context. The sources really emphasize that this complexity is the core trigger for all the caution we see. Its location, its energy resources, its relationships. It all keeps it central to global discussions.
And it's the #1 reason why quick, decisive, or, overly emotional support is simply not an option for Moscow or Beijing.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more then. Before looking outward at the partners, we first have to understand the intense pressures Iran is facing, both internally and externally.
Because those conditions are what fundamentally dictate the limits of any support they might receive.
And the single biggest external pressure, without a doubt, is the system of sanctions and economic strain.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about comprehensive financial and economic restrictions. They severely limit access to global banking, they restrict trade, and they just make cooperation incredibly challenging and risky for everyone involved.
The effect of this is, it's profound, isn't it? It's systemic.
It is. It creates this constant economic pressure, this financial strain, not just on the government, but you see it in public spending, in the stability of their currency, and in overall investor confidence.
It's a huge headwind that any partner would have to push against.
And that's why analysts are so careful with their vocabulary. You notice when they describe these situations, they avoid strong, hyperbolic language. Instead, they use these very neutral, fact-based expressions.
Like what? What are some examples?
You'll often see phrases like, the economy is facing ongoing challenges, or economic conditions remain difficult. It's a kind of professional restraint. It's designed to keep the analysis objective and avoid escalating tensions with, charged words.
And it's crucial to remember this isn't just about external sanctions. It's also shaped by internal factors, economic management, domestic priorities.
Right. These internal policies are constantly interacting with the external pressure. It's why experts never call the situation fixed. They'll almost always describe it as fluid or evolving.
This fluidity is key.
It is. Because the outcomes are so uncertain and depend on so many variables, professional reporting has to use language that conveys that possibility. We see a heavy reliance on modal verbs: may, might, could.
Right, so you'll read something like, trade volumes might decrease, or negotiations could resume if conditions improve.
Exactly. It's a linguistic tool. It signals uncertainty while still delivering a logical analysis. It acknowledges that, nothing is ever guaranteed in international relations.
So let's apply that cautious calculus to the first major partner, Russia. Now here's where it gets really interesting, because our sources stress that this relationship is purely transactional.
Yes. It is absolutely not based on emotional alignment or some deep historical friendship.
So we need to be very clear when we define strategic alignment in this context.
We do. Cooperation exists strictly where national interests overlap. That's it. The alignment is specific, it's flexible, and it is entirely interest-based. It's not a permanent alliance.
So what does that overlap look like in practice?
The sources point to a few main areas. First, regional influence, especially in a place like Syria.
Second, energy market coordination. Think about frameworks like OPEC plus S, where they can work together to stabilize or boost oil prices. That benefits both of their state revenues directly.
And third, there is military and defense cooperation, arms sales, joint strategic planning.
Right, but even these are described as long-term projects. They're dependent on global regulations and, critically, on Russia's ability to move money and material through these very sanctioned environments.
That cause and effect detail is crucial. The more international pressure Iran faces, the more appealing Russia becomes as a partner because they're both operating under similar Western constraints. Exactly. It creates a logical, shared risk incentive. That's the real heart of the strategic alignment. It's not friendship, it's shared pressure.
But the cooperation has very sharp boundaries. Our sources are clear on the limits of Russian support.
Very clear. Russia has to maintain diplomatic flexibility. It deals with a huge range of partners, Gulf states, India, others. A full, permanent alliance with Iran would seriously compromise those other very important relationships.
Wait, okay, so if diplomatic reputation is such a critical constraint, why do our sources still show Russia actively using this partnership to challenge Western policy? Doesn't that hurt their reputation anyway?
That is a great question, and it really illustrates the tightrope walk they're on. You see, they are challenging the structure of Western policy, the sanctions system itself, but they're very careful not to violate their own stated international agreements.
Ah, so it's a subtle distinction.
It is. They leverage the partnership for regional influence, but they never offer the kind of complete, unconditional economic safety net that would trigger total international isolation for Russia itself. They can't afford that.
It's transactional, right down to the last detail. Okay, it's China. If Russia's calculus is driven by regional defense and security, China's is almost purely about economics and global stability.
That's right. So what does economic diplomacy look like when China applies it to Iran?
Well, it seems to be the cornerstone of their entire global strategy.
It is. It centers on long-term planning, maximizing trade stability, and establishing predictable partnerships. Their engagement with Iran is framed, fundamentally, in terms of securing their own energy supplies and maintaining a kind of global diplomatic balance. It has nothing to do with political ideology.
And the sheer size of the Chinese economy is what drives that need for stability.
It's everything. China is the world's largest trading nation. It absolutely requires stable trade routes, predictable energy, and secure markets. That need forces Beijing to maintain dialogue and cooperation even in the most sensitive, sanctioned places.
So specifically, their trade focuses on energy, infrastructure, and commercial exchange.
And these are treated purely as practical economic necessities. It's supply and demand. It is not an ideological preference for the Iranian system.
And the sources emphasize how long-term this is.
Yeah.
You see phrases like long-term framework or future-oriented cooperation.
Yes, which suggests they're looking decades ahead. They're incorporating Iran into these huge plans like the Belt and Road Initiative, not just reacting to today's news.
And the scale of their investment framework, it's enormous. This kind of deep infrastructure investment means China is tying Iran's long-term economic fate directly to Beijing's own goals. It's a powerful lever.
It guarantees continued engagement, for sure.
But, our sources show China is also highly constrained. If this diplomacy is so predictable and stable, why did we see interruptions in their oil shipments during periods of intense U.S. pressure? Does the diplomacy sometimes just mask opportunism?
It absolutely can. The limits and balance for China are extensive, precisely because its global network is so vast. China has to balance its relationship with Iran against its absolutely crucial trade relationships with the U.S., with Europe, and with Iran's own regional rivals like Saudi Arabia.
And that's a line they won't cross.
They cannot cross it.
Yeah.
Any strong action in support of Iran could disrupt their entire global trade apparatus. That risk is simply too high.
That's a huge constraint. It means they will always prioritize their own core economic stability over any single partner.
And this is where we see analysts use those clear comparison sentences to explain the balance. They'll say something like, while China cooperates economically with Iran, it also maintains strong trade relationships elsewhere that take priority.
Which signals that their support is conditional. It's secondary to their wider global interests.
And that analytical restraint is crucial. It shows you that the analyst understands the complexity without making some kind of oversimplified moral judgment.
So, if Russia and China's partnerships are so carefully constrained, what does it actually mean when analysts say these countries support Iran? What are they really talking about?
That is the core question. When analysts use the word support professionally, they are almost exclusively referring to non-military, non-confrontational actions.
So things like diplomatic communication, continued economic cooperation, political coordination in places like the UN.
Exactly. The whole focus is on process, legality, and long-term strategy. It is not about providing immediate force or engaging in some kind of confrontation.
So diplomatic support just means keeping the channels open, maintaining communication, participating in negotiations, basically managing disagreements without letting things escalate.
And ensuring Iran isn't completely isolated on the world stage, and the economic support, the trade deals, the investment, it's all tightly limited. Even massive infrastructure deals are structured to, as much as possible, adhere to international rules and avoid direct conflict with sanctions.
And they use cautious language like exploring options or considering long-term frameworks.
Always to signal that caution.
The sources seem to boil all of this down to 5 crucial factors. 5 big reasons that stop these global powers from ever going all in.
These are the reasons why being cautious is a strategic choice, not a weakness. First is global trade risk.
Right. Any perceived overreach could disrupt international markets, affect currencies, cause investor flight.
For economies as large as China's or Russia's, that risk is completely unacceptable.
Second is diplomatic reputation. Their actions affect their ability to negotiate everywhere else. If you're seen as reckless, you lose long-term credibility.
And credibility is essential for global leadership. Third is global balance. Actions toward one country always affect relationships with dozens of others.
It's like juggling, isn't it? You can't just focus on one ball.
It's exactly like that. Fourth is international law. The existing legal frameworks, the treaties, they define what is acceptable support. You have to operate within those rules or you risk losing legitimacy.
And finally, number 5, internal priorities. Leaders have to consider how foreign policy affects things back home. Jobs, economic stability.
The government always has to prioritize its own citizens. Foreign support is always a secondary consideration.
So every single decision exists inside this complex global system where one action creates multiple reactions.
It does. And this necessity for caution is reflected in the language. You mentioned this earlier. Professional reporting often uses the passive voice.
Right. You'll read, policies are influenced by international standards, or actions are limited by rules.
And that technique focuses on the authority of the system itself rather than assigning personal blame. It keeps the analysis neutral and objective, even when the topic is highly charged.
The sources really do paint a very clear picture. These international relationships, especially under pressure, are rooted in careful, interest-based calculation. Emotional alignment just takes a back seat.
Precisely. And I think we've landed on 3 really valuable takeaways from this. First, Russia and China's engagement is defined by selective partnership and contingent outcomes. The support lasts only as long as the practical benefit is mutual.
Second, future scenarios are never presented as facts. Analysts discuss what could happen using heavy doses of possibility and conditionality.
Right. Economic cooperation could continue, however. Modifications might be required if global sanctions are intensified. That kind of language. It signals uncertainty responsibly.
And third, recognizing the power of that structured, formal language. The connectors like therefore, however, although, is essential for understanding the analysis.
It allows them to present these balanced arguments, showing multiple constraints and viewpoints at the same time without falling into bias.
So this deep dive really wasn't just about geopolitics. It was about understanding how global powers have to function inside a system of constraints.
Yes, and the real power of being well-informed, for you listening, lies in your ability to recognize and even use this kind of professional language to analyze complex systems yourself.
Great final thought.
We'd encourage you to use this not just for the factual knowledge, but as a framework. The next time you read a geopolitical report, actively look for those constraints. The why behind the cautious action. Why did that deal fall through? Why was support limited? The answer will almost always be found in one of those 5 constraints we discussed. That critical perspective is transferable to every complex discussion you'll ever face.